For the Bhagavad Gita reading this evening, I would like to take a reading from the 16th chapter. And in this chapter, right at the very beginning of the chapter, Lord Krishna is explaining to Arjuna some of the qualities of what a wise person has. And he names quite a few. And then he goes on and in chapter 16, stanza number 2, he says, harmlessness, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, disinclination toward fault-finding, kindness to all, non-covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steadfastness of purpose, are the endowments of those who are divinely inclined. And out of those many qualities that he expressed there, I've chosen to speak this evening on the one, truthfulness. And I'd like to read what Swami Kriyananda has said in his commentary. It's only one paragraph long, so it's rather quick. Truthfulness, he says, might be included under straightforwardness. It has, however, the further connotation of not wishing reality to be other than it is. Be truthful with yourself. Don't try to pretend, even to yourself, that your motives have been perhaps better than they may actually have been. Only when we face reality as it is can we begin to make it what it ought to be. If, for instance, you have spoken rudely, we can only become gentler in our speech after we've faced frankly the possibility that we may, in fact, have spoken harshly on occasion. I wanted to address this topic because last night we were having a webinar on our Living Wisely, Living Well series, which we do every Wednesday night at 7:30. If you care to tune in, either myself or Dhyanati up in Gurgaon, Gopushan Devi, or Devrashi does that, and we rotate. And last night I was called upon to do the discourse last night. It's a half hour long. And we take the reading that is from the book, Living Wisely, Living Well, and whatever happens to be the daily reading, we use that as our starting point and then give commentary on that. And so last night, the topic it wasn't exactly truthfulness, but it has a relationship to it. It was listening and patience. And so I titled it Listening Patiently, is to another person, what they say, to bring out the best as you listen to somebody. And the art of listening was somewhat of the topic that I went into. And when we say listening, we're not necessarily speaking here of the ear, we're speaking listening with the heart, trying to listen in a sense of what that phrase that Swami Kriyananda so often would use. He would say, when we see a situation that's before us, trying to understand what is trying to happen here. And that, of course, is not always obvious on the surface. It's being able to look under the surface and with our intuition be able to perceive what is really going on. And in order to do that, we have to be able to see what is in front of us correctly. We have to see the reality of what is going on. And the effort to do that is related to this topic of truthfulness. Truthfulness is as Swamiji mentioned in this commentary, is the ability to see reality as it is, instead of pretending it's something else. Now, truthfulness, of course, has other connotations as well, but that certainly is one quality, is to be able to see what's in front of us as it is. And as he uses the example there of if you have a fault, you know how some people sometimes are, oh, I don't really have that fault. And you pretend, even to yourself, you look in the mirror and you say, oh, I have that fault. No, I don't. I'm really not like that at all. I don't have that quality. Well, on a deeper level, you aren't that. But nevertheless, it's like having a little bit of a little bit of grease or black paint on your face. You say, well, it's really not there, so I don't need to do anything about it. When the simple thing to do is just say, oops, and wash it off. And then, so unless you can see yourself or see a situation to be able to do, and you can't really do something about it. And so what we were speaking about last night, I was speaking to that in terms of its relationship to patience and art of listening. And I used the word, as Swamiji is often used, he says you have to be able to accept reality. It's more than just seeing it. You have to be able to accept reality as it is, because you can see something but deny it, you see. And but that is only wishing, you might say. But to be able to see reality and to accept reality as it is. Now, the word acceptance is subtle. The word acceptance, it has many shades of meaning. And so somebody wrote me an email afterwards, which I always invite people, if you have a question, just write me an email. And so the next morning, this morning, I received an email from somebody who was confused because they had said, I don't, accepting reality that seems very passive to me, just to accept reality as you said. And I could understand that person's point of view, how they were seeing it. They were making a mistake because acceptance has that subtle shades of meaning that could be interpreted that way. And I have run into this before where people have interpreted that and just accepting meaning you see a crime being committed and say, well, it's his karma, it's not my karma, I don't have to do anything. Or you see, you go outside on the patio there and you see a big pile of trash in the courtyard. Say, well, I accept it, it's just trash. I mean, right? I mean, it's acceptance, just accepting things as they are and not doing anything about it. And with some people, when we say acceptance, they say accept reality as it is. That's what they interpret it to be, just to see things and to not act, just to see things, accept it. Well, I can understand how somebody may interpret it that way, but that's mistaken interpretation of what's being implied in this statement. We accept means we recognize reality for what it is, but also even recognize isn't quite the right word because it's more than recognizing. Acceptance means acceptance that yes, this is how life is. I'm seeing life, that's how life is, but it does not mean that we then don't do something about it, because in order to take the step to perhaps take the trash out of the courtyard would be we have to see it first and say it's there. And if you look out there, well, it's really not so clean, dirty after all. I'm pretending it's not there. That's not going to, we're just deluding ourselves when we do that. So we have to be able to accept this life it's around us and see it to the best of our ability, what is before us, in order to be able to do something about it. And so I wrote back to this person, just explaining this little bit of difference, shorter than what I'm explaining tonight. And then I mentioned, think of a general. He's leading an army, and he's almost surrounded. But of course, the general knows he's supposed to be in charge of a very powerful army, but now the opposition has almost surrounded him. He doesn't want to call for help because it would make himself look bad to his superiors. And so he pretends, oh, I'm really not surrounded. I'm in control, and he does nothing because he's unable to recognize the reality. My powerful army, how can these ruffians surround me? And it can't happen, but it does happen. And sometimes life is like that, and so consequently he does nothing because he doesn't recognize it. He's surrounded and he loses everything. His refusal to see and to accept the reality of the situation. Like, I don't know if ostriches really do put their head under the ground in Australia or not. Does anybody knows that really happened? But the comic books always show the ostrich putting his head under the ground. assuming the idea there, if I don't look at it, it's going to go away. And we don't want to be like that, because it's not reality. We're not looking at the situation as it is, because then we can't deal with it as it is. So we have to be able to see, and to be truthful is to honestly see the situation around us. But from the devotee's point of view, we have to honestly see ourselves where we are, recognize it, not to beat ourselves or to do anything like that, but to see, I need improvement, I need to do this, I need to, if I want to improve myself, I must change. And to be able to recognize that, and then it gives you impetus to actually take whatever the next step is. And this is the first step on making that change, is to see life as it is and to be truthful, to be honest. And this is one thing that Swami Priyananda said: if you want to be successful on the spiritual path, in the long run, you must have absolute self-honesty, which is being truthful with yourself. And of course you want to be truthful with others as well, but especially so with yourself. I remember years ago, when I lived in America at the Nanda village, I was the property manager for some years there. Then you might say a town has a mayor, and then I was the mayor. That was my job. I was in charge of the village and what was going on there. And one of the least favorite jobs that I had, I dealt with the property, but I also dealt with the membership as well. And if there was a problem of some sort that affected everybody, I had to deal with that. And I much rather deal with things that are not living, like property, rather than people with their problems, because it gets tricky. But anyway, nevertheless, that was part of the job. Well, it's a large community. At that time, we probably had about between 250, 300 people. And about 100 of them were children. And some of, from the little guys, the little ones, all the way up to teenagers and, going off to college. So there were many, and most of them were just angels. Some of them would go through a phase would be devils, they'd be trouble, a little bit of trouble. And there was one such boy there, and he was getting into trouble all the time. He was always and unfortunately for him, he was the kind of boy that would get in trouble with other boys, and he's the guy that would always get caught. It was his karma. But so he would be getting in trouble. And so I would, I'd have to deal with that. People would call me up, so, and I'd have to go deal with this. And this boy was breaking into offices, and he was stealing things, and and somebody wasn't home, he'd kind of go in there and take things and doing all sorts of things. And it was just a bit of a thorn in my side. And so I went and talked to the mother. I went over to the home many times, and almost invariably I talked to the mother, and oh no, let's just call this. His name wasn't Timmy, but I'm going to call him Timmy. But says, Timmy would never, ever, ever do that. And I says, well, you see, and then I'd explain it to him. And he says, well, Timmy's such a good boy. He's no, he would never, ever do that. And I talk to her about it and give her all the situation. I says, but I assure you, and then something has to change. And then she would say, well, I know Timmy, and Timmy and I talk all the time, and he is always absolutely honest with me. He would never lie to me. Well, that mother didn't know little boys or big boys too well, because they lie all the time to their mothers. If you've got sons, believe me. He would never lie to me. Well, she was had her head in the sand, and she really had. And unfortunately, I understood she was being loyal to her son. And I admired that, and I supported that. But on the other hand, there comes a point where loyalty and enabling, you see, because ultimately that boy got into more trouble. He got more serious trouble later on in his life. And she, I think, being a better parent, would have done something right then. Now, the father, too, was not quite as bad as that, but there was a little bit of a divide. And when the boy was having a little bit of trouble or discord about his behavior, he'd run to his mother, and she'd protect him and enabled him. So when he grew up later, he ended up having bigger trouble. So this, of course, we don't want to be like that. We have to see, and of course, her self-worth as a mother was at stake, because if she had admitted that he had these faults, that would have reflected badly on her or whatever the psychology was. I don't know, but that was my guess. And we don't want to be like that. We have to look at what's happening and be able to deal with it. And then you can make some improvements. Now this is something that all of us need to do for ourselves. We need to accept life as it is, see life as it is, accept it and reality, and then what do we do next? We act. We do action, and we do the appropriate thing. Now, sometimes this question comes up when we talk about affirmations. People say, well, isn't that just, I'm affirming, if I'm affirming something, I'm positive. Well, I'm really not positive, but I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. Isn't this just pretending also? But what we're doing when we affirm is we are substituting, we're not ignoring the fact that perhaps I'm not positive right now, but we're substituting a higher reality and wanting to substitute that for a lower reality. And so we see ourselves, and we see that a state of consciousness perhaps we have allowed ourselves to come over us. We're recognizing it, and in order to overcome it and change it, we affirm a positive. Now, it doesn't mean we forget the negative, that we forget the fault. And I always liked what Master said. He says, remember, saintliness is not dumbness. It's not being dumb. You recognize and you use whatever strategy that you can to be able to overcome that obstacle. And so here it is in the Gita, where Krishna is talking about truthfulness, and this aspect of truthfulness, of being absolutely truthful, particularly with ourselves. It's not truthfulness just in terms of factual honesty, but it's truthfulness of trying to see what is happening here, what is going on with us, what qualities within myself need to change. How might I, and recognize that, and not to feel guilty about it. You see, sometimes people feel guilty, that, oh, I have a fault. So it's easier to cover it up, you might say, rather than to expose it to the sun and then do something about it. And this is if we want to make progress on the spiritual path and be able to sustain ourselves and to become the person we really are, that's what we need. But we remember, if we do see a fault in ourselves, that's not really us. It's not really us. We don't want to identify with any of these things. That boy really, although he was getting into mischief, serious mischief, he wasn't that. And I didn't want to, it was hard. I didn't want to see him in that way, but I tried to always remember he's not that. There's something underneath that. And I think the mom, if she was trying to see that too, the only missing part was she didn't see, he hadn't quite got there yet. But we don't want to identify with our faults. But we do need to recognize them if we have them. And then take the next step, which is to change them.